Hey everybody, welcome to the Kristen SuperCrip Milefchik Ringside Report Show. Today I'm going to be doing an independent episode. That means I have no special guests or interviews. I'm going to be talking about interabled relationships and dating in the disability world. My show usually isn't geared towards younger audiences, but I think it's a good idea to mention that this particular episode is especially not geared for younger audiences due to some of the content of the video. And also, if you're a family member of mine, mom, dad, you might want to turn off this video now. I'm going to be talking about some personal things that you may not want to really hear about. So, yeah, I hope that you enjoy this episode. I think that it's going to have a lot of great information for people that might be curious about having a relationship with somebody that has a visible disability. And also for people that are disabled who have never had a relationship with somebody who's non-disabled. From my personal experience, you might be able to learn some things. This isn't going to be a video diary entry. I don't think that my life is fascinating enough to do that, but I will be talking generally about how I've learned some things about stereotypes around interdisabled or interabled relationships. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy. Okay, welcome back to the Kristen SuperCrip Milefchik Ringside Report Show. As I said, this episode is going to be about interabled relationships and dating in the disability world. There are a lot of stereotypes surrounding interabled relationships. And if you're not sure what an interabled relationship is, you may have heard of the term interracial relationship, and it's kind of like that, where an interracial relationship pertains to two people in a relationship that come from different races or ethnic backgrounds, where an interabled relationship is generally pertaining to a relationship between someone who is disabled and someone who is not disabled or non-disabled. So obviously, I have a disability, and my disability is very visible because I'm a wheelchair user, a lifelong wheelchair user. And so it's obvious when you look at me that I have a disability. This has definitely affected my dating life and relationships that I've had in my life. But after 20 years of being an adult, I have had a few significant long-term relationships with both men that were non-disabled and disabled. So I'm able to kind of compare and contrast my experiences in those relationships to talk about some of the things that I've learned are stereotypes regarding interabled relationships. First of all, one of the first things that people who are non-disabled assume about people who are disabled and being in a relationship with them is that if they're in a relationship with them, they would have to take care of them. They would have to provide some sort of physical assistance or be even their primary caretaker in the relationship. That is the first assumption that I want to address. For me, I receive services through the state that I live in that allow me to hire caregivers. And my paid caregivers provide the care that I need to get out of bed, get dressed, take showers, etc. If I were entering a romantic relationship with someone, I would never presume that they would want to or need to be a caregiver for me. Now, this is not to say that there aren't interabled relationships where the non-disabled partner does provide care for the disabled person, but that is not applicable in all cases. And it's a choice that the couple can make for whether that is something that they want to do. My personal experience has been that in future relationships, I would not want to do that again. I have had relationships where the non-disabled person that I'm with has provided my care. What I can say about that is that because of society's perception that people with disabilities are often a burden to society, they also apply that to relationships, and they think that it must be more work and more strenuous for a non-disabled person to be in a relationship with a disabled person. I can tell you that that is extremely harmful. It affects the balance in a relationship. No person should ever feel like they are a burden to the person that they're with in a relationship. This kind of touches on another assumption about interabled relationships and disabilities in general, which is that if a person doesn't look like they have a disability, then they must not be disabled. Well, there are disabilities that are invisible. And sometimes mental health issues are disabilities. And they can be every bit as much strenuous in a relationship or require as much patience and understanding and willingness for the other person in the relationship to compromise. And I have been in such a relationship. But from the outside looking in, I was the one that was considered disabled. And that is one of those things that disabled people often deal with, is feeling like they are a burden on whoever they're with, whether it be in a romantic relationship or whether they have a family member that provides some of their care, or even in situations where the people that are caring for them are paid for their time, just because of that pervasive stereotype that people with disabilities are burdens, which is perpetuated by movies and TV and so forth. I mean, the movie Me Before You, that would be a perfect example of that. Two people in a relationship, or that at least have, romantic feelings for each other, and one is disabled and ends up deciding to end his life because he can't deal with the fact that he thinks that he's a burden. it is something that interferes with the standards that people with disabilities set when they go into a relationship. And I have done this myself in the past. I'm not proud to admit that. I've come a long way with my self-esteem and self-confidence to not do that anymore. But especially when I was much younger, I had the idea in my head from living in the world that I do, that any man that would love me and be attracted to me didn't have to meet high expectations because I was damaged goods, simply for the fact that I had a disability. I set my standards lower. And for anybody that's watching this that is disabled, please never put yourself in that situation. In fact, one of my earliest relationships was incredibly abusive. And what led up to being in that abusive relationship is that I felt that because this person seemed to put me up on a pedestal and seemed very into me, very attracted to me, and so forth, that I should feel lucky for him feeling that way, even though he was possessive and controlling. And by the time that I realized just how dangerous he was, I was already in too deep. We were living together, and he kept me basically a prisoner. I'm not able to get myself out of bed myself. I can't do certain physical things for myself, so he took advantage of that. And this is an incredibly dangerous circumstance in our society, and people with disabilities are way more likely to be victims of domestic violence than other groups of people. And so even though, you know, this is something that many would say that the person that is disabled, it may have got themselves into, and it's their problem. It's also a failure of society to address these really harmful stereotypes and what they do to the self-esteem of people with disabilities. Another stereotype that I want to address is sex and intimacy. I'm actually new to the dating scene again, and I did recently get out of a serious relationship, but don't judge. Everybody has to cope with breakups in their own way. And for me, talking to men again and, you know, looking again, it is helping me move forward with my life. But one thing that is a forever annoying and incredibly exhausting problem with the way that non-disabled people look at disabled people is that as soon as they hear that someone is disabled, they assume that they can't have sex or that they wouldn't be interested in intimacy. Definitely not true. For one thing, I have an 18-year-old daughter, and she's my biological daughter. Clearly, if I could not have sex, that would not be possible. So, you know, and even people with disabilities that may have some sort of sexual functional limitations, that doesn't mean that sex as a all-encompassing thing as far as their intimacy and ability to do other things, or their desire for sexual pleasure and all of that does not still apply. Now, this is going back to the fact that I have dated or had significant relationships, long-term relationships with both non-disabled and non-disabled people. But one of the things that I would say is an assumption also is that if both people are disabled, that sex is not in the equation, or that would be something that wouldn't be as satisfying or good in the relationship. But ironically, one of the most satisfying and fulfilling in the intimacy and sexual departments relationship that I had was with somebody else who had a disability and was in a wheelchair like myself. What I can tell you is also about disability is that sexual function and how people go about having sex and all of that in the disability world varies greatly. Just because somebody is in a wheelchair even doesn't mean that their abilities are the same as someone else that's also in a wheelchair. They could have two totally different disabilities and both use wheelchairs, and those disabilities affect their sexuality in different ways. So, for example, with that, the person that I dated for a long time that was in a wheelchair had a spinal cord injury. I have a neuromuscular disease. They are completely different. And so should never assume really anything about sexuality. And if sexuality is something that is really important to you in a relationship, and you're talking to someone or interested in someone with a disability, you need to ask them, first ask them their comfort level with talking about it, but then talk to them about it. As long as they give you the go-ahead and they're open to talking about it, you're not going to be able to understand or figure out anything without talking to that person individually, because every person is extremely unique in the disability world, just like they are in the able-bodied world when it comes to sex. Okay, so something that you do not want to do. So I mentioned I'm now on a dating app. I'm starting to enter the dating field again, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And one person that I had started conversation with, like we did not end up talking for that long. But of course, that was the first question, was about sex and my abilities and all that kind of stuff. So, I was open to talking about it. This is something that I'm not shy about. And especially when it comes to dating, I feel like, sex is a need. And I understand for people that are dating that might be something that they're curious about. So I was fine with answering questions. But even still, after I answered questions and I made it known that I was fine with answering questions, this person took it upon themselves to look up wheelchair porn on the internet to get more information, I guess. Don't do that. Just never, don't do that, because wheelchair porn, disability porn, generally is not accurate. First of all, just like real porn is not usually accurate or a realistic portrayal of what sex is actually like, but especially in this instance, because wheelchair porn, disability porn, that generally tends to be made for people that have a fetish with disability in sex. And yes, that exists. If you did not know that existed, they even have a name for it. They call people that are into that devotees. The reason I know this is a thing is because I've been contacted by them before. It was definitely eye-opening the first time that I found out that this world existed. Disability porn, wheelchair porn, that's also not even usually made by people that are actually disabled. They're like able-bodied people pretending to be disabled and like having sex in wheelchairs and so forth for the pleasure of these so-called devotees or other just randomly curious people. But it's definitely not a great resource if what you're looking for is factual information. And I would say that, yeah, you could maybe look up their specific disability and information about that disability and how it functions or how it affects sexual function. But there's a limited amount of information about that either out there anyway, and that is also based on the fact that people with disabilities are often infantilized and considered asexual, and like there's just a limited amount of information out there about it. So best way to solve that problem, in my personal opinion, is talk to your person, talk to the actual individual that you want to know about. Because also it's important that if you're trying to get to know somebody, that you get to know the whole person. If you're just finding out about the sex part without finding out about their personal take on it, then you're missing a very big piece of the puzzle. And I would say that when it comes to sex, in my opinion, also that a lot of that is mental anyway. Has to do with, you know, a person's compatibility with somebody, their attraction to them, and so forth. And sex is not, and intimacy is not going to be satisfying unless you actually like the person. Big surprise. Another overall thing that I would say about stereotypes as far as interabled relationships and disabled people dating each other is that people automatically assume that if both people are disabled, they'll understand each other better, or they'll have more in common and they'll just be able to relate to each other more. Definitely not true. The relationship, I've had 2 relationships with people with disabilities that were long-term and significant. But in both cases, I would say that my interest in activism, disability activism, political interests, and just a lot of things, my values and beliefs and so forth, were not necessarily as in sync with those individuals as they should be for a long-term relationship to really work. Whereas one of the relationship with a non-disabled person that I had, they were probably more into my disability activism, had the same political beliefs as I did, a lot of the same interests, and all of that, then the disabled people that I was with. And so on that personal level, we really connected more. So that there is no silver bullet solution to, which one is better. It all comes down to the individual and love, attraction, interests, and compatibility, and all of those things, just like any other relationship. Another thing is burnout, and keeping the spark alive, I guess you could say. I think a lot of people assume that it is more likely that there will be burnout in a relationship if one of the people is disabled. What I can say about this is that burnout and keeping the spark alive is an issue in any relationship, regardless of whether disability is a part of it or not. Keeping a spark alive takes work, takes sacrifice, and it takes effort. It's not like once you've been with somebody for a long time, especially if you're living with them and you're going through the daily grind with them and you're paying bills together and you're doing all those sorts of things together, that it's going to stay like it was when you first met and everything was new and fresh. In order for a relationship to stay healthy and to keep the intimacy alive and all of that, you have to communicate and you have to make an effort to keep having those romantic times. Make a date night, even if you're together all the time, you still need to set aside time for romance. You also need to make sure that you have time to yourself and that you have your me time. One of the ironic things is that, especially when it comes to intimacy and sex and things like that, is that when you have a disability, what you might not be able to do physically, you might have to make up for in communication. You might have to do better about telling the partner, don't do this, move me like that, and so on. And that's something that a lot of times in non-disabled relationships, from what I've heard, people kind of take for granted. And their communication is actually not as good. And so, in a way, in that department, I think that having a disability is actually, it can actually make communication better. But even still, keeping the romance and the spark going has absolutely zero to do with whether a person needs physical assistance or has a disability or anything like that, and everything to do with communication and both parties putting in an effort to keep the love alive. Relationships are work. It would be really nice if relationships could just keep on going without there having to be any effort put into it, that they just stay magical and new and fresh without any effort, but it's simply not how it works. Relationships are all about compromise. And whether you have a disability or you don't have a disability, compromises are absolutely essential to keeping a relationship working. It doesn't require more compromise to be with somebody that's disabled than it does to be with anybody else. Everybody has things about them that require the person that they're with to be understanding, empathetic. We all have to put ourselves into our partner's shoes sometimes to understand what they're dealing with and be willing to meet them halfway. That's just the nature of relationships. And, yes, if you have a disability and your partner has to do a little extra physically or whatever to help you out with things when they're around, it may feel like you are asking more of them than somebody else who doesn't have a disability would. However, what I've learned is that as much as I've had to ask from the people that I've been with, I have had to give every bit as much to them to meet them halfway with their needs. And that is the way that all relationships work. And the more I have talked to other people about their relationships, ones that have worked and ones that haven't, I've learned that this is universal. This is not something that is only applicable in interabled relationships. Dating. So dating when you're disabled is extremely hard. People that have never been in a relationship with somebody that's disabled just don't know what to expect. I don't hold it against them, but it takes so much more patience and trial and error and all of that. Sometimes you'll start talking to someone and they seem very open-minded at first, and then the more you talk to them, the more you find out that they're really, really skeptical and really worried and really paranoid about what it means to date somebody that's disabled. And so what I would say with that is if you're disabled and you're looking for love, don't allow yourself to get discouraged over that, because it's not your fault. Unfortunately, there is so many harmful stereotypes, like everything that I've been discussing. And I mentioned one movie that gives a really bad representation of disability out there earlier, Me Before You, but there are lots and lots and lots of those. And this is basically propaganda that gets pumped into the heads of people that watch TV and movies, and they've been being fed that stuff their entire lives. Did you know that the movie $1 Million Baby is actually not entirely fictitious? It was based, at least partially, even though it's not admitted, on a real person that went through almost identical circumstances. But at the end of $1 Million Baby, she decides to kill herself because of her disability, where in real life, the woman that movie was based on goes to high schools and does presentations to kids about closed head injuries because she has a closed head injury. And she goes out there to give people hope about life after having a closed head injury. There's actually disability activism groups devoted to stopping this stereotype in film called Not Dead Yet. That's the name of the group, is Not Dead Yet, because it has had such a harmful effect that there are actually children now that have disabilities that are now going through with assisted suicide. And I've had parents that have supported it because they also buy into this idea that you cannot have a happy or fulfilling life if you have a disability. Now, if you're not disabled and you're watching this, imagine suddenly becoming disabled. Being non-disabled is temporary for everybody. Everybody becomes disabled eventually, whether it be from age or because you have an injury of some sort. You could end up in a car accident tomorrow and be disabled. Now imagine entering the disability world for the first time and reflecting on all of these movies where they have dramatized and sensationalized disability and made it into these tragedies, and how it would feel. Would you have hope? Would you even think about being able to find love if you're a single person again? It's terrible. It's a terrible, terrible thing to have a disability and have be surrounded by these incredibly negative, harmful stereotypes. But on the bright note, there are people out there that are open-minded and that are able to look past the exterior because they are looking for someone who shares the same values as they do, and just want somebody who will be a companion to them. And not only be their lover and be attractive and all of that, but who will be their best friend. And, you know, that's what I'm still looking for in my life. And it's made it really hard to keep looking because of all the harmful stereotypes that are out there, because of ableism. If you don't know what ableism is, it is discrimination and assumptions and attitudes out there around surrounding disability. And ableism applies to so many things, but relationships and romantic relationships and sex and intimacy and all of that are most definitely impacted by ableism. And it's my goal to put an end to ableism, or at least make people much more aware of its existence. But what I hope for is that anybody watching this, both non-disabled people and disabled people, might get a different outlook on what relationships are supposed to look like, and that it opens up their minds to new possibilities. And I hope that disabled people don't give up. Everybody deserves to have someone in their life that can be a companion, and it looks different for everybody. What love means to me may look completely different to somebody else, and that's fine. But whatever it looks like to you, you deserve that, and don't ever set your standards lower because you think that it's all you're capable of achieving. Never ever do that to yourself. Everybody deserves love. And know your value, know your worth. And I'm going to wrap up with that. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really love to hear your feedback. That's what the comments in the section below are for. I really appreciate hearing from people and being able to use those comments to guide my next episodes. The more questions and the more feedback I get, the more it can guide the content on my future episodes. So also, please feel free to share this episode if you know somebody that you think would benefit from seeing this, and help me get some more subscribers. I'm always looking to grow my audience, and mostly because I want to reach as many people as possible. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, or whenever you happen to watch this. And I'll be seeing you all again soon. Goodbye.